The rain fell in sheets across Highway 47, turning the asphalt into a river of reflected headlights and broken promises. Max, a 3-year-old German Shepherd mix, pressed himself against the rusted guardrail, his brown eyes following the red taillights of the only family he had ever known as they disappeared into the storm. He didn't understand why the car had stopped, why gentle hands had suddenly pushed him out onto the gravel shoulder, or why those hands now drove away without him. Thunder cracked overhead, and Max whimpered, his thick coat already soaked through. He had been with the Morrison family since he was 8 weeks old, a Christmas present for their daughter, Emily. He remembered her small hands stroking his puppy fur, remembered learning to fetch tennis balls in their suburban backyard, remembered sleeping at the foot of her bed every night for 3 years. But he also remembered the gradual change, the way the family's attention had shifted when Emily started school, when David Morrison's job became more demanding, when Sarah Morrison decided that a large, aggressive-looking dog didn't fit their new neighborhood's image. Max wasn't aggressive. He had never bitten anyone, never growled except in play, never done anything but love the family that had chosen him. But he was big, and his mixed-breed heritage gave him an appearance that some found intimidating. In the Morrisons' new upscale neighborhood of Riverside Estates, where homeowners association rules were strict and appearances were everything, Max had become a liability rather than a family member. David Morrison had been the one to suggest it, though Sarah had agreed quickly enough. "We can't take him to the new house," David had said. "The HOA has breed restrictions, and even though he's a mix, he looks too much like the prohibited breeds. We could get fined. Besides, he's too big for the smaller yard." Emily had cried, had begged to keep Max, had promised to walk him every day and keep him quiet. But she was only 8 years old, and her voice carried no weight against her parents' decision. They had discussed taking Max to a shelter, but David had dismissed the idea. "Those places are full. They'll probably just put him down anyway. At least if we leave him somewhere rural, he has a chance. Dogs are survivors. He'll find someone else, or he'll adapt to living wild." So they had driven Max out to Highway 47, a rural stretch an hour from their old home and 90 minutes from their new one. They had chosen a rainy evening, as if the weather might somehow make their abandonment more merciful, as if Max might simply disappear into the storm and absolve them of guilt. Sarah had packed a small bag with some of Max's food and left it beside him on the shoulder, though the rain had already soaked through the paper bag, turning the kibble into mush. Max waited at the spot where they had left him for 3 hours, certain they would return. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights momentarily illuminating his soaked form before rushing past. Some drivers saw him and felt a pang of concern, but no one stopped. A dog on a highway in a storm was tragic, but it was also someone else's problem. People had their own destinations, their own lives, their own concerns. A wet dog was just another unfortunate sight on a difficult journey. As darkness deepened and the rain intensified, Max finally moved. His instincts told him that staying in one place was dangerous, that the road with its rushing cars was a threat. He made his way down the embankment beside the highway, following a small creek that ran parallel to the road. His paws sank into mud, and branches scraped his sides. But the tree cover provided some shelter from the worst of the rain. He found a hollow beneath a fallen oak tree and crawled inside, shivering uncontrollably. His stomach was empty. The ruined food bag had been quickly scattered by the wind, and even if it hadn't been, Max associated food with home, with his bowl in the Morrison kitchen, with Emily sneaking him treats under the dinner table. The concept of eating alone in the wild was foreign and frightening. That first night was the longest of Max's life. He dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small creature in the underbrush, the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. His body ached from cold and confusion. His mind replayed the moment of abandonment over and over, searching for an explanation that made sense, for some indication of what he had done wrong to deserve this. By morning, the rain had lessened to a drizzle. Max emerged from his shelter, hungry and disoriented. He climbed back up to the highway, thinking perhaps the Morrisons had returned for him during the night, but the shoulder was empty, except for scattered litter and his own paw prints, already washing away in the rain. No family, no car, no explanation. Max began to walk. He didn't have a plan or a destination. He simply knew that staying still meant accepting abandonment, and something deep in his DNA rejected that acceptance. Dogs were pack animals, domesticated over thousands of years to bond with humans, to serve and protect and love their families. Every instinct Max possessed told him to find his pack, to return to his people, to make his way home. The problem was that Max didn't know where home was anymore. The Morrisons had moved to Riverside Estates 3 days before abandoning him, but Max had never been to the new house. His last clear memory of home was the Morrisons' old residence, a modest ranch-style house on Maple Street in the suburb of Fairfield. He had no way of knowing that the Morrisons no longer lived there, that a new family had already moved in, that his old home was now occupied by strangers who had never known a dog named Max. But dogs possess a sense of direction that humans barely understand. Max's brain stored magnetic information, solar position, and scent markers in ways that created an internal map of his territory. He knew in some fundamental way the direction of Maple Street, and so he began to walk in that direction along the highway shoulder, his paws bloody and his body exhausted, driven by loyalty to a family that had betrayed him. The first day of walking was brutal. Max covered perhaps 15 miles, stopping occasionally to drink from puddles or rest in the shade of an overpass. Cars whizzed past him at 70 miles per hour, some coming dangerously close. Several drivers honked, whether in warning or annoyance. Max couldn't tell. One truck driver threw a half-eaten sandwich out his window, and Max devoured it gratefully, his first food in 24 hours. As evening approached, Max's paws were raw and bleeding. His coat, which had briefly dried in the afternoon sun, was matted with mud and road grime. He looked nothing like the well-groomed family pet he had been just 2 days earlier. He looked like what he was becoming, a stray, an abandoned dog, a creature existing on the margins of human society. He spent his second night in an abandoned farm building, sharing the space with a family of raccoons who hissed at him but ultimately ignored his presence. Max was too tired to care, too exhausted to do anything but collapse on the dirt floor and sleep the dreamless sleep of the utterly depleted. On the third day, Max's journey took him through a small town. He stayed to the back alleys and side streets, his instincts telling him that looking like a stray in a populated area was dangerous. He was right. Our animal control officer spotted him near a grocery store dumpster where Max had been searching for food. The officer approached with a catchpole and gentle words, but Max's trust in humans had been shattered. He bolted, running through yards and across streets, finally losing his pursuer in a wooded area on the town's outskirts. The encounter left Max even more wary. He learned to move at night when possible, to avoid people, to survive on scraps and small prey he could catch. He was becoming feral, his domestic training slowly being overridden by survival instincts. But through it all, he kept moving in the direction of Maple Street, kept following the internal compass that told him home was northeast, kept believing that if he could just get back to familiar territory, everything would be okay. By the end of the first week, Max had traveled approximately 60 miles. He had lost weight, his ribs now visible through his matted coat. His paws were calloused and scarred. His eyes, once bright with the trust and joy of a beloved pet, had become cautious and haunted. But he had survived. Against all odds, he had survived. Max's transformation from family pet to road survivor accelerated with each passing day. The German Shepherd mix, who had once waited patiently for meals, now hunted for food with increasingly desperate efficiency. He learned to catch mice in fields, to raid dumpsters behind restaurants in the early morning hours, to identify which humans might toss him scraps and which would call authorities or chase him away. But the discrimination Max faced as a stray was immediate and harsh. In the towns and suburbs he passed through, people's reactions to him ranged from pity to hostility. Those who pitied him rarely acted on that emotion. Maybe they called a shelter, maybe they mentioned seeing a stray dog to their neighbors, but they didn't approach or help. Those who felt hostility were more direct. Max was chased by homeowners protecting their property, threatened by other stray dogs defending their territory, and actively hunted by animal control officers who saw him as a problem to be solved. The prejudice against stray dogs ran deep, particularly for large breeds or mixed breeds that looked intimidating. Max's size and appearance, his German Shepherd features combined with something broader and more muscular, made people assume he was dangerous. Children were pulled away when he appeared. Women clutched their purses and crossed the street. Men shouted and threw stones. Nobody stopped to see the gentleness in his eyes, the absence of aggression in his posture. They saw only what they feared, a big, dirty, potentially dangerous stray dog. On the 8th day of his journey, Max experienced the cruelty of human prejudice firsthand. He had entered a neighborhood park in the early morning, hoping to drink from a fountain and perhaps find discarded food from the previous day's picnickers. A woman jogging through the park saw him and immediately screamed, despite Max being 50 feet away and showing no interest in her. Her screams brought other early morning exercisers running. "There's a vicious dog loose," she shouted, pointing at Max. "Someone call 911. It tried to attack me." Max had done nothing of the sort. He hadn't even moved toward her. But within minutes, police arrived, and Max found himself being pursued through the park by officers with weapons drawn. He ran, terrified by the noise and aggression, by the way humans who were supposed to protect were now hunting him. He escaped into a drainage culvert, spending the next 12 hours hiding in darkness, while police and animal control searched the area. When he finally emerged after nightfall, Max heard neighbors discussing the attack by a pit bull-type dog. The woman's story had grown in the telling. Now Max had charged her, had shown his teeth, had been clearly rabid or aggressive. The neighborhood was on alert, with residents warned to keep their children inside and their own pets secured. A bounty of sorts had been established. Anyone who could capture or provide information leading to the capture of the dangerous stray would receive recognition from the Homeowners Association. Max left that neighborhood quickly, but the experience taught him a harsh lesson. His mere existence was seen as a threat. The prejudice wasn't based on his actions, but on his appearance and status. As a stray, as a large mixed-breed dog without a collar or clear ownership, he was automatically categorized as dangerous. The irony was bitter. The Morrisons had abandoned him partly because of breed discrimination in their new neighborhood, and now that same type of discrimination was making his survival even harder. As Max continued northeast toward Fairfield, he encountered other strays and homeless animals. Some were friendly, others territorial. He met an old Labrador mix missing a leg who had been living behind a warehouse for 2 years. The lab, whom Max thought of as grey because of his muzzle, shared a dumpster meal with Max and communicated in the way dogs do, through posture, scent, and soft vocalizations. Gray's story was similar to Max's. He had been abandoned when his owners moved, deemed too old and too expensive to treat after an accident left him with a shattered leg. The amputation had been performed by a charity vet, but Gray's owners never came to claim him afterward. He had survived on the streets for 2 years, growing old before his time, invisible to most humans, except when they wanted to chase him away. People see what they want to see, Gray's eyes seemed to say as they shared scraps from a torn garbage bag. They don't see the dog we were, the loyalty we gave, the love we offered. They only see the inconvenience we've become. Max spent one night with Gray before continuing his journey. The old dog didn't try to follow. His traveling days were over. But the encounter reinforced what Max was learning. The world was full of dogs like him, abandoned because they no longer fit into their families' lives, surviving on the margins, facing prejudice and cruelty simply for existing without human ownership. On day 10, Max finally reached familiar territory. He was in Fairfield's outer suburbs, areas he had walked with David Morrison on weekend hikes. His pace quickened, energy returning despite his exhaustion and hunger. He was close now. Home was close. The Morrisons would be there, and despite everything, Max's domesticated heart still believed that reaching them would make everything right. He navigated through neighborhoods that sparked memories. The park where Emily had taught him to catch a frisbee, the veterinary clinic where he had received his shots, the pet store where the Morrisons had bought his food. Each landmark was a beacon, pulling him forward. He was a ghost, returning to a life that no longer existed, but he didn't know that yet. Max reached Maple Street just as the sun was setting on his 10th day of freedom. The familiar houses lined up like old friends. The oak trees he had marked as his territory still stood. The sidewalks he had walked daily still stretched ahead. And there, at the end of the cul-de-sac, was the Morrison house. Except it wasn't the Morrison house anymore. The lawn was mowed in a different pattern. Different cars sat in the driveway. A child's bicycle that didn't belong to Emily leaned against the garage. But Max didn't process these details. He only saw home. He approached the front door and lay down on the porch, as he had done thousands of times before. He waited for the door to open, for Emily to squeal his name and throw her arms around his neck, for Sarah to fill his bowl, for everything to return to the way it was supposed to be. He waited, his tail thumping hopefully against the wooden boards. The door did open eventually. A man Max had never seen before stood there, phone in hand, looking down at Max with surprise and concern. "Jesus, where did you come from?" the man said. Then into his phone, "Yeah, there's a stray dog on my porch, a big one. German Shepherd, maybe? Looks pretty rough. Can you send someone to pick it up?" Max's tail stopped wagging. This wasn't his family. These weren't his people. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He stood and backed away from the door, confusion and grief overwhelming his exhausted mind. The man reached for Max's collar, except Max no longer wore a collar. It had been lost days ago, caught on a fence during one of his many escapes. "Easy, boy," the man said, his voice kind, but his intentions clear. He wanted to contain Max, to hold him until authorities arrived. Max bolted. He ran from the porch, from Maple Street, from the home that was no longer his. Behind him, he heard the man calling, "Wait, come back! I won't hurt you!" But Max was beyond listening. The last anchor of his hope had been ripped away. The Morrisons were gone. Home was gone. There was nothing left. For 2 days, Max wandered Fairfield in a daze. He revisited every place he had ever been with the Morrisons, the dog park where he had played, the walking trail where he had hiked, even the veterinary clinic where he had been treated. Each location was a painful reminder of what he had lost, of the life that had been stripped away. He slept in bushes near his old house, watching the new family come and go, unable to accept that Emily wasn't inside, that he would never again curl up at the foot of her bed. On the 3rd day after reaching Fairfield, Max noticed something that changed everything, a scent. It was faint, almost undetectable beneath the urban smells of car exhaust and cut grass, but it was unmistakably Morrison. More specifically, it was Emily's scent, that unique combination of shampoo, young human, and the treats she used to sneak from her pockets. The scent trail led away from Maple Street, heading northeast toward the more affluent section of Fairfield. Max followed it with renewed urgency, his nose to the ground, his body animated by the first real hope he had felt since being abandoned. The Morrisons hadn't vanished. They had moved. They were somewhere nearby. If he could just find them, if he could just show them he had survived, perhaps they would take him back. Perhaps the abandonment had been a terrible mistake. Max didn't understand human decisions or homeowners' association rules. He couldn't comprehend that the Morrisons had abandoned him precisely so they could live in a place where he wasn't allowed. In his mind, the logic was simple. Find family, reunite with family, return to being loved. The fact that he was now even more disheveled, dirty and feral-looking than when they had left him didn't register. He was Max. He was their dog. That should be enough. The scent trail led him to Riverside Estates, the upscale gated community where the Morrisons had moved. The neighborhood was a stark contrast to Maple Street. Where the old neighborhood had been modest and welcoming, Riverside Estates was pristine and exclusive. Every lawn was manicured to perfection. Every house looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. A large sign at the community entrance proclaimed, "Private property, residents and authorized guests only." Below that, in smaller letters, "Strict pet policies enforced." Max approached the entrance, but a security guard in a small booth spotted him immediately. "Hey, no strays allowed in here. Get out!" The guard didn't even leave his booth, just banged on the window and waved his arms. Max retreated but circled around, finding a spot where the community's decorative fence was low enough to jump. He cleared it on his second attempt and entered Riverside Estates. The discrimination Max faced in this neighborhood was instant and intense. The residents of Riverside Estates had paid premium prices for their homes, and part of what they had paid for was a certain aesthetic, a certain quality of life that explicitly excluded things like stray dogs. Within minutes of Max appearing on their perfect streets, residents were calling security, posting warnings on the community Facebook page, and pulling their children and small designer dogs inside. Max didn't care about the commotion. He was following Emily's scent, which was growing stronger. He navigated through the winding streets, past identical perfect lawns, until he found it. 847 Riverside Drive. A two-story colonial with white pillars and a circular driveway. David Morrison's car was parked out front. Max's heart, if dogs can be said to have hearts in the emotional sense, soared. He had found them. After 2 weeks of suffering and surviving, after 90 miles of walking and countless trials, he had found his family. He approached the front door, his tail wagging cautiously, and sat down on the porch exactly as he had been trained to do when visiting someone's home. Inside, he could hear voices. Emily's voice, Sarah's voice. They were home. They were right there, separated from him by just a door. Max whined softly, then louder. He scratched at the door the way he used to when he needed to go outside. He was letting them know he was there, that he had come back, that he had found his way home. The door opened. Sarah Morrison stood there, and for a moment she didn't recognize the filthy, thin, scarred creature on her porch. Then her eyes widened in shock. "Max," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Oh my God. David, come here." Max's tail wagged furiously. She recognized him. They would let him in now. Everything would be okay. But Sarah didn't move to embrace him or welcome him inside. Instead, she took a step back, her hand covering her mouth. David appeared behind her and swore under his breath. How is he here? That's impossible. We left him 90 miles away." Emily pushed between her parents, and when she saw Max, she screamed with joy. "Max, you came back. Mommy, Daddy, Max came back." She tried to rush forward, but David grabbed her shoulder. "Emily, no, stay inside." "But it's Max. He found us." "Emily, I said stay inside." David's voice was sharp, brooking no argument. Emily began to cry, but David pulled her back and closed the door partway, keeping his body between his daughter and the dog. "Sarah, call security," David said quietly. "Tell them there's an aggressive stray on our property. Tell them to bring a catchpole." "But David, it's Max. He came back to us." "Exactly, which means he's determined, which means he's a problem. Look at him, he looks feral, he could have rabies, and if the HOA finds out we had anything to do with this dog, we could be fined or even forced to move. We can't be associated with him. Call security, now." Max sat on the porch, his tail still wagging hopefully, completely unaware of the conversation happening. He could see Emily crying through the window, could hear her begging to let him in, but he couldn't understand why the door wasn't opening fully, why no one was welcoming him. Sarah made the call. Within minutes, 2 security vehicles arrived, along with an animal control truck that someone had called from outside the community. Max found himself suddenly surrounded by men with nets and catchpoles, their voices loud and commanding. "Stay still, dog. Nobody's going to hurt you." Jesus, look at the size of him. What breed is that? Probably one of those pit bull mixes. Dangerous breeds. Someone was irresponsible letting him loose in here. Max panicked. He tried to run but was cornered against the Morrison house. The men advanced, and Max did something he had never done in his life. He bared his teeth and growled. Not because he was aggressive by nature, but because he was terrified. Because every instinct told him that being caught meant death. Because the last vestiges of his trust in humans had just been shattered by watching his own family call authorities to remove him. "Aggressive dog," one officer shouted. "We need to be careful. This one's dangerous." They weren't wrong, in a sense. Max had become dangerous, not because of breed or nature, but because he had been made so by abandonment and betrayal. The gentle family dog had been transformed by circumstances into something wild and frightened, something that would fight to survive. But Max was outnumbered and exhausted. They got a catchpole around his neck, and despite his struggling, they dragged him to the animal control truck. As they loaded him into the cage in the back, Max looked back at the Morrison house one more time. Emily was at the window, her face pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah stood behind her, looking guilty and sad. David had already turned away, returning to his evening routine. The truck doors closed, and Max disappeared into darkness, still not understanding what he had done wrong, still believing somehow that this was all a terrible mistake that would be corrected. But in his heart, the heart of a dog who had walked 90 miles to find his family, a terrible truth was beginning to form. They didn't want him. They had never wanted him. The abandonment wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. The animal shelter where Max was taken was overcrowded and understaffed, as most shelters are. He was placed in a small concrete kennel, one of dozens lining a loud, fluorescent-lit corridor. Around him dogs barked desperately, some seeking attention, some expressing fear, some simply driven mad by confinement. The noise was constant and overwhelming. A veterinary technician examined Max, documenting his condition: severe malnutrition, infected paw pads, multiple cuts and abrasions, possible mange, evidence of trauma. The tech was kind but clinical, her compassion dulled by years of seeing too many abandoned animals and knowing too few would find homes. "This is a tough one," she told her supervisor. "He's a large breed mix, possibly German Shepherd and something bully breed. He showed aggression when captured. Adult male, probably 3 or 4 years old. No chip, no collar, no identification." She paused, running her hand gently over Max's head. "He's actually sweet once he calms down. Lets me touch him, no problem, but the size and the aggression report..." The supervisor sighed, checking her clipboard. "We're at 140% capacity. I've got a list of 30 dogs that need to be moved to make room for incoming animals. a large, unidentified, aggressive male with no prospects for adoption. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The tech understood the reality. Dogs like Max were the first to be euthanized when space ran out. "How long does he have?" the tech asked quietly. "Standard hold is 3 days for unidentified strays, but given the aggression report and our capacity issues, maybe 2, if no one claims him or shows adoption interest." Again, the unfinished sentence hung in the air. Max was given food and water, which he consumed gratefully despite his depression. His body's survival instincts overrode his emotional devastation. He slept fitfully that first night in the shelter, unused to the concrete floor, the bars, the constant noise. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily's face pressed against the window. Every time he woke, he expected to be back in the Morrison house, for this all to have been a nightmare. On the second day, his kennel card was updated. Large adult male, GSD pit mix, caution, showed aggression during capture, not cleared for public adoption viewing. The caution note was the death sentence. Potential adopters wouldn't even see him. He had been categorized as unadoptable based on one moment of fear-driven defensiveness. The prejudice that had followed Max as a stray now followed him in the shelter. Breed discrimination was rampant, despite efforts to judge dogs as individuals. Max's appearance, broad chest, strong jaw, intense eyes, triggered assumptions. Pit bull, people thought, even though Max was a mix of multiple breeds with no dominant bully breed heritage. German Shepherd, people thought, knowing that breed could be protective and strong. Large, aggressive male, the paperwork said, and that label stuck regardless of Max's actual temperament. On the afternoon of his second day, a couple came to the shelter looking to adopt. They were kind people, genuinely wanting to rescue a dog. The shelter volunteer showed them several animals, carefully avoiding the caution kennels. But the woman spotted Max was drawn to him despite his bedraggled appearance. "What about him?" she asked. "He looked so sad." The volunteer checked his card and shook her head. "I'm sorry, he's not available. He has some behavioral issues we're still evaluating." "Behavioral issues? What kind?" The volunteer lowered her voice. "He was aggressive during capture, showed his teeth, growled. He's probably not safe with children or other pets. Honestly, he's probably not safe at all. There are plenty of other wonderful dogs available." The couple moved on, and Max watched them adopt a small, friendly terrier mix 2 kennels down. He was happy for that dog. Truly, dogs don't feel jealousy in the human sense. But he felt the weight of his own situation, the way his mere appearance and one moment of defensive fear had categorized him as unworthable of a second chance. That night, Max heard the shelter workers discussing their euthanasia schedule for the following day. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, the sadness in their voices. He understood that time was running out. On the morning of his 3rd day, something unexpected happened. Father Michael, the elderly priest from the Morrisons' old church in Fairfield, came to the shelter. He had heard about Max's capture through the neighborhood grapevine, how a stray dog had shown up at the Morrisons' old house, how it had somehow tracked them to their new home 90 miles away, how it had been caught and taken to the shelter. The story had spread through the old neighborhood, and several former neighbors who remembered Max had contacted Father Michael, knowing he was involved in animal welfare. Father Michael asked to see Max, and despite the caution on his card, the priest's calm authority convinced the staff to allow it. He was led to Max's kennel, and when Max saw the familiar face, something in him broke. The dog, who had been stoic through abandonment and survival, now began to cry. Not bark, but actually cry, making sounds of grief that were nearly human in their expressiveness. "Oh, my friend," Father Michael said softly, kneeling despite his arthritis. "What have they done to you?" He spent an hour with Max, learning his story from the shelter staff, seeing the caution notes, understanding that Max was scheduled for euthanasia the next morning. Father Michael was old, living in a small apartment that didn't allow large dogs. He couldn't adopt Max himself, but he made phone calls, used connections, and most importantly, he told Max's story to anyone who would listen. "This dog walked 90 miles to find his family," he told the shelter director. 90 miles. And when he found them, they called animal control. "This isn't an aggressive dog. This is a heartbroken dog. There's a difference." The shelter director was sympathetic but bound by policies and capacity issues. "I understand, Father, but I have protocols. The dog showed aggression, even if it was fear-based. Without someone willing to take responsibility for him, preferably someone with large breed experience, I can't hold him indefinitely. I have other animals coming in daily." Father Michael returned to his car and made more calls. He contacted rescue organizations, posted Max's story on social media, reached out to everyone he knew in the animal welfare community. The story began to spread. Loyal dog abandoned. Walks 90 miles to find family. Family rejects him, now scheduled to die. It was heartbreaking, and it was true. By evening, Max's story had gone viral locally. News stations picked it up. "Devoted dog's incredible journey ends in tragedy," read one headline. The local animal welfare community was outraged, not just at the Morrisons, but at the system that would euthanize a dog for the crime of being abandoned and afraid. The Morrisons, for their part, were facing significant backlash. Their neighbors in Riverside Estates were divided. Some sympathized with the HOA rule concerns. Others were disgusted by the abandonment. David Morrison issued a statement defending their decision. "The dog was becoming aggressive and was too large for our new home. We tried to find him a good situation. His reappearance at our new home was concerning and potentially dangerous. We did what any responsible homeowner would do." But the public wasn't buying it. Emily Morrison's school friends knew she was devastated. Sarah Morrison's social media was flooded with angry comments. The family was experiencing the consequences of their prejudice, their decision to value property values and appearances over loyalty and compassion. At the shelter, as evening fell on Max's third day, the deadline was approaching. Father Michael had found a possible rescue organization willing to take Max, but they needed 24 more hours to arrange transport and foster placement. The shelter director had already shown exceptional flexibility by extending Max's hold this long. She couldn't justify additional extensions, not with new animals arriving daily, some in dire need of immediate medical care. At 8 p.m., Father Michael sat in his car outside the shelter and prayed. Not just for Max, but for all abandoned animals, for all creatures victimized by human prejudice and cruelty. He prayed for the capacity to forgive the Morrisons, though he found that forgiveness difficult. Mostly, he prayed for a miracle, for some intervention that would save Max's life. Sometimes, prayers are answered in unexpected ways. At 8:47 p.m. on Max's third night in the shelter, a silver Honda pulled into the parking lot. A woman in her mid-30s stepped out, followed by a teenage girl. They approached the shelter's after-hours entrance and pressed the buzzer. The night attendant, preparing to close up, answered with some irritation. "We're closed. Come back tomorrow morning at 9. "Please," the woman said. "I'm here about the dog, the one from the news, the one who walked 90 miles. Is he still here?" The attendant hesitated. "Max? Yeah, he's still here. But his situation is complicated. You'd need to come back tomorrow and speak with—" "Tomorrow might be too late," the woman interrupted. "Please, just let me see him. 5 minutes." Something in her voice made the attendant relent. He let them in, leading them to Max's kennel. The woman knelt down, and Max, exhausted from 3 days of stress and fear, barely lifted his head to acknowledge them. But the teenage girl gasped. "Mom, he looks just like Rusty. Remember Rusty?" The woman nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I know, sweetie." She turned to the attendant. "My name is Jennifer Torres. This is my daughter, Ashley. 10 years ago, we had a dog named Rusty, German Shepherd mix. Looked a lot like this one. He was the best dog we ever had. But we were going through some financial problems, and we had to move suddenly to a place that didn't allow large dogs. Her voice caught. We did the same thing. We abandoned him. We told ourselves he'd be fine, that he'd find someone else. But I've regretted it every single day for 10 years. The attendant listened, understanding beginning to dawn. "When I saw this dog's story on the news," Jennifer continued, "saw what he did, how far he walked, and then saw how his family rejected him. I saw us. I saw what we did to Rusty. We never knew what happened to him. He probably died alone, scared, thinking we'd betrayed him. Because we had. We absolutely had." She wiped her eyes. "I can't save Rusty. But I can save this dog. I need to save this dog. My daughter and I, we've talked about it. We have a house with a yard now. I work from home. Ashley's in high school and has been asking for a dog for years. We're ready. We're qualified. And we owe this to Rusty's memory." The attendant checked his watch. "Ma'am, this is irregular. The adoption process requires interviews, home checks, approval from management." "How long does he have?" Jennifer asked directly. The attendant sighed. "He's scheduled for euthanasia tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. "Then we don't have time for a process," Jennifer said firmly. "What do I need to do right now, tonight, to save this dog's life?" The attendant made a decision that would probably get him in trouble. "Wait here." He called the shelter director at home, waking her up, and explained the situation. The director was skeptical until he handed the phone to Jennifer, who repeated her story with a raw honesty that was impossible to doubt. The director asked questions about Jennifer's home situation, her experience with large dogs, her understanding that Max had shown defensive aggression. "Ma'am," Jennifer said, "I understand completely. He's scared and traumatized because people he trusted betrayed him. I know exactly how that feels, and I promise you, I will work with him. I'll get him training if needed. I'll be patient. I'll give him the home he deserves. Please, let me do the right thing this time." There was a long pause. Then the director said, "Put me back on with the night attendant." After a brief conversation, the attendant hung up and turned to Jennifer. "She's approved an emergency placement. We'll process the paperwork tonight. There's a fee for the adoption, and you'll need to sign forms agreeing to follow up home checks and behavioral training requirements." Jennifer pulled out her credit card immediately. Done. Absolutely done. As the paperwork was processed, Ashley sat by Max's kennel, talking softly to him. "You're going to come home with us," she said. "You're going to have a family who actually wants you, and we're going to call you Max. But you'll be our Max, not theirs. You don't belong to people who don't deserve you." Max lifted his head, responding to the gentleness in her voice. His tail gave a tentative wag. An hour later, Max walked out of the shelter on a new leash, accompanied by Jennifer and Ashley Torres. Father Michael, who had been called by the shelter director and had rushed over, stood in the parking lot and wept with relief and joy. "Thank you," he said to Jennifer. "You've restored my faith." "Don't thank me," Jennifer replied. "Thank this dog for reminding us all what loyalty means and what it costs when we betray it." The transition to the Torres household wasn't easy. Max was traumatized, skittish, and struggling with the fear that this new family would also abandon him. But Jennifer and Ashley were patient. They gave him space when he needed it, comfort when he sought it, and consistent, unwavering presence. They took him to a veterinarian who treated his physical wounds. They enrolled him in positive reinforcement training to help him rebuild trust. They introduced him slowly to their home, never forcing, always encouraging. Within a week, Max began to relax. Within a month, he was playing with Ashley in the backyard. Within 3 months, he had fully bonded with his new family, sleeping at the foot of Ashley's bed, just as he once had with Emily, but with a crucial difference. He was wanted, he was chosen, he was home in a way that transcended location. The story of Max's rescue spread as widely as the story of his abandonment had. The Torres family received letters from all over the country, some from people who had also made the mistake of abandoning pets and now lived with that regret. Some from people who had rescued abandoned animals, some simply from people moved by the story of loyalty, loss, and redemption. For the Morrisons, the aftermath was more complicated. They faced continued social ostracism in their old neighborhood. Emily struggled with depression and guilt, eventually requiring counseling. Sarah Morrison, in particular, was changed by the experience. She began volunteering at the local animal shelter, trying in some small way to atone for what they had done. David Morrison remained defensive, insisting they had made the practical choice, but his relationships with his wife and daughter were damaged, perhaps irreparably. The broader impact was more positive. Max's story prompted local legislation requiring microchips for all adopted pets, making abandonment trackable. Several rescue organizations saw increased funding and volunteer support. Most importantly, the story started conversations about breed discrimination, about the value of loyalty, about the responsibilities that come with pet ownership, and about the prejudices that lead people to discard living creatures as if they were disposable. 6 months after Max's adoption, Jennifer Torres organized a fundraiser for the shelter that had saved him. The event raised enough money to expand the facility and hire additional staff. At the event, Max was the guest of honor, wearing a bandana that read, "Loyalty saved me." He greeted hundreds of people with the gentle friendliness that had always been his nature, proving to everyone who met him that the aggressive label had been a cruel mischaracterization born of fear and circumstance. Father Michael attended the event, and in a short speech, he said something that resonated with everyone present. Max's journey was 90 miles long, but it taught us something infinite. Loyalty isn't conditional, love isn't disposable, and every creature, human or animal, deserves to be valued, not for what they can do for us, but for who they are. Ashley Torres hugged Max as Father Michael spoke, and Max's tail wagged with the genuine happiness of a dog who had found not just a home, but belonging. He had survived abandonment, prejudice, and the very real threat of death. He had walked 90 miles to find a family that didn't want him, only to be found by a family that did. His journey had been impossible in multiple ways: the distance, the survival, the navigation, and ultimately, the redemption. But Max's story wasn't just about one dog. It was about all the abandoned animals who never get second chances, about the prejudices that determine which lives are valued and which are discarded, about the human capacity for both cruelty and compassion. Max had been lucky. Most abandoned animals aren't. Most don't walk 90 miles because they don't have the strength or opportunity. Most don't get last-minute rescues because there aren't enough rescuers. Most die in shelters or on streets. Their loyalty never rewarded, their love never requited. That reality haunted Jennifer Torres, driving her continued advocacy work. "I save every dog I can," she told reporters, "because I couldn't save Rusty. And because every one of these dogs is Max, loyal, loving, and deserving of a chance." A year after Max's adoption, on the anniversary of the day the Morrisons abandoned him on Highway 47, Jennifer and Ashley took Max back to that location. They stood on the shoulder where he had been left in the rain, and they planted a small marker. It read, "Here began Max's journey, 90 miles of loyalty. May we all be worthy of such devotion." Max sniffed around the area with interest, but showed no signs of recognizing it. Perhaps he didn't remember, or perhaps the trauma had been overwritten by better memories. Either way, he was content, secure in the knowledge that the people with him now wouldn't leave him behind. As they drove away from Highway 47, heading back to their home, where Max was safe and loved, Ashley said, "Do you think the Morrisons ever regret what they did?" Jennifer considered the question. "I hope so. Not because I want them to suffer, but because regret means conscience. And conscience means the possibility of growth, of becoming better. I regretted what I did to Rusty, and that regret changed me. Maybe their regret will change them too." But Max doesn't need them to change," Ashley observed, scratching behind Max's ears as he sat between them in the back seat. "He has us now." "He has us now," Jennifer agreed, "and we have him, and that's redemption for all of us." Max rested his head on Ashley's lap and closed his eyes, the rhythmic motion of the car lulling him towards sleep. He dreamed, as dogs do, and in his dreams he was running, not away from anything, but toward everything. Home, family, love, security. Thank you for experiencing Max's incredible journey with us. This story isn't just about one dog. It's about the millions of animals abandoned every year, facing discrimination, fear, and death, simply because they no longer fit into someone's lifestyle. Max was one of the lucky ones. Too many others never get their second chance. If this story moved you, please take action. Share this video with everyone you know, not just animal lovers, but especially people who might be considering giving up their pet. Let Max's story be a warning about the consequences of abandonment and a reminder of the loyalty we owe to creatures who would walk 90 miles to find us. Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true stories that challenge our assumptions, touch our hearts, and inspire us to be better humans. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change how you see the world. But most importantly, if you're able, take real action. Adopt a shelter animal, especially those unadoptable large breeds facing discrimination. Volunteer at your local shelter, donate to rescue organizations, foster an animal in need. Advocate against breed-specific legislation that judges dogs by appearance rather than behavior. And if you know someone considering abandoning their pet, share Max's story and help them find alternatives. Leave a comment telling us, have you adopted a rescue animal? Have you witnessed pet abandonment? What does loyalty mean to you? Your voice matters, and your story could inspire someone else to make the right choice. Remember, Max walked 90 miles for a family that didn't deserve him, only to find a family that did. Every abandoned animal deserves that same redemption. Be the person who provides it. Be the person worthy of that kind of loyalty. Subscribe now, share this story, and let's create a world where no animal has to walk 90 miles to find love, because they never lose it in the first place.